Okay, we're doing digestive system, and we're going to jump into part 2. We just did a check your progress for 9.3. Make sure you know all the stuff before that. Feel comfortable answering those questions. And let's move on to the accessory organs. All right, so the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder. We've talked about all these things a lot already. So what we're going to do is explain their functions, talk about the fluids they secrete, and explain how they're regulated. We haven't really gotten into that yet. So the pancreas is behind the stomach and near the stomach. It makes pancreatic juice. I think this should say behind and below the stomach a little bit, but anyway, definitely behind. But I think it hangs down. Anyway, pancreatic juice is full of sodium bicarbonate, which is a basic solution that neutralizes the acid in the chyme coming out of the stomach, coming through the pyloric sphincter. It also is full of digestive enzymes. The enzymes that we have in the stomach, like pepsin, don't work when we get them into a basic solution. We need to be basic to keep from frying the intestines. So we keep from eroding the intestines with acid. So we put in this bicarbonate solution. It's basic. It neutralizes some of the acidity. Great, but that shuts down the stomach enzymes. So we're going to have to introduce our own enzymes from the pancreas to finish the digestion. All right. So the pancreas also is famous for making insulin. Type 1 diabetes is when someone doesn't have enough insulin. That's an autoimmune disorder usually. The body attacks and destroys the insulin-making cells. Type 2 diabetes, this is when your body stops responding to the insulin, or when you're not making enough insulin because you have too much body. That's the obesity they're talking about there. All right. So there's a pancreas, and you can see that there is a duct that you introduce fluid in, a pancreatic duct, and it's very close to the bile duct. All right. But the liver, and I'm surprised we're not talking about this later, but I guess this would be a good spot. All right, so the liver makes bile. It's collected in bile canals, which go to the bile duct, and the bile duct goes to the gallbladder, and that's where we store this bile. The bile is just a fluid that will, actually bile salts, fluid is a strong word, because you can get bile stones, but it is a substance that will emulsify fats, break up the fat droplets to give a greater surface area, which gives the enzyme lipase a better chance of breaking down the fat. Oh, here's a good way to say it. The bile salts will physically break the fats into small droplets, which allows the lipase to do chemical breakdown of these small droplets. Okay. Anyway, when we're looking right here at the liver, you see sheets of hepatocytes, liver cells, and you have a central vein where you drain. You have, wow, why are we not talking about hepatic triads? Well, this right here is a hepatic triad. We have an artery, a vein, and a bile duct right there. Anyway, let's move on. So the liver is the largest gland in the body, and it says upper right abdominal cavity. Actually, it'd be better to say it's the whole upper abdominal cavity, but it's thicker and bigger on the right. Anyway, the liver is divided into lobes, and the lobes are divided into lobules. Each little lobule has a vein and an artery, and probably has bile producing things too. Now, the hepatic portal vein we hadn't talked about yet. I hinted at it a few times when we were talking earlier about the intestines. Like, oh, and you take in nutrients off of the intestines and they go to the rest of the body. I'm like, probably goes to the liver first. This is what we're talking about. The hepatic portal vein is taking blood from the digestive system that just got filled with all kinds of nutrients and stuff, but it probably also got filled with some bad things. And it takes them all to the liver, takes that blood that's been filled up with nutrients and bad things to the liver so the liver can filter out the ickiness. All right. So this is funny. They have 7 functions of the liver. They could probably put like 300 functions of the liver. If you don't know what something does in the human body and anatomy, if you have no clue at all, I would guess liver if I know nothing about the subject, because the liver does so many things. Anyway, so let's go through this. The liver can destroy old red blood cells, and it excretes bilirubin, a breakdown product of hemoglobin and bile, a liver product. I want to make it clear that this also, you were already told, oh, well, the spleen is where you break down old red blood cells. Yeah, that's true too. And we transport chemicals from the breakdown of the red blood cells there to the liver to make bilirubin. Basically, we got so many red blood cells that one method of filtering out and destroying red blood cells is not enough. But the spleen doesn't do all of the things that the liver does with the chemicals. So we got to transport some of them. All right, here, what I was talking about before, detoxify the blood by removing and metabolizing poisonous substances. The liver is a filter, and it filters out bad things, things that are bad for you. It stores iron and B12, fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Fat-soluble vitamins are, well, you probably guessed, being stored in fat cells. You do not want to take too many of them. Like, take too much vitamin C, who cares? You'll pee the extra out. A, D, E, and K, you can take too much, and it can shorten your life. I may try to find and throw up some links to show you later. All right, so albumins, fibrinogen, those are made in the liver. It will turn glucose into glycogen, and that glycogen is the glycogen that will then store in muscles during carb loading. Let's see. Produces urea after breaking down amino acids, yeah, and that'll then, most of it will be removed in us in the urine by the kidneys. Anyway, it helps regulate blood cholesterol level, converting some into bile salts. Yeah, so the liver will take some of the cholesterol and make bile salts out of them. It will take some of the byproducts of the hemoglobin and make bile salt out of it too, when we break down hemoglobin, but we'll talk about that more. All right, so the liver stores vitamins. It affects sugar. It'll store extra glucose as glycogen, and when the blood glucose is low, it'll release the glycogen. It is capable of turning glycerol and amino acids into glucose. That's called gluconeogenesis, as the making of new glucoses from other stuff. This is important because the brain almost always runs on nothing but sugar. In reality, there is a little research that shows that occasionally you might be able to convert it over to another fuel source, but it usually doesn't work. take the heart, for example. The heart, the heart at rest runs on fatty acids. And there are some people who try to, we could convert the brain to run on other things, but it would involve a very slow starvation process to do it, and usually end up dead with that kind of nonsense. The brain wants to run on glucose. And if the glucose level in your blood gets too low, the liver will make new glucose for you out of fats, out of amino acids, and that sugar will be used to run the brain. Anyway, liver continued says produces plasma protein. I don't know whether that's continued because they said it right there on number 4 and because that's a table. All right. Yeah, table 9.2, good information, know it all, much shorter than it could be. Moving on. Regulates cholesterol levels. We already heard that it takes cholesterol and makes bile salts. All right. Produces there we go. I started to say produces bile, but we've got that. We already talked about that. The bile will be used to emulsify fats. What made me pause here was I was trying to remember the word bilirubin, and now that we have it, I remember urobilinogen as well. So here's the deal. The green pigment that makes the bile green colored is actually a byproduct of the red hemoglobin. What happens in the spleen is you break down the red blood cells and you convert part of the hemoglobin into what's called urobilinogen, and then it travels through the blood to the liver where it is converted into bilirubin, and that bilirubin is the green stuff in the bile that when it hits your intestine, it becomes the stuff that turns your poop brown. I mean that. That's, yeah, kind of gross, but that's the way it works. All right, let's move on. All right, so gallbladder, pear-shaped little organ, stores bile. You can get gallstones. They're horrible. They usually treat them nowadays with lithotropy, which is a fancy way of saying they stick you in a water tank and they aim sound waves at you. And the sound waves are so intense that they can shatter the gallstones and break them up. And you're like, oh, well, then I'll just pee them out. Yeah, but then you got all those sharp edges as you're passing them. It's not good. It hurts. I've never done it, but I've had friends who have, and they said it was dreadful. Anyway, moving on. So let's talk about liver diseases. If you are having enough problem with your liver, bile pigments can leak into the blood, causing jaundice. Now, when they say bile pigments leaking into the jaundice, since urobilinogen is yellow, I would bet that it's probably urobilinogen they're talking about, but it can cause the skin to go yellow and the eyes to go yellow. That's what we call jaundice. And you can also see that yellowish tinge around the outside of a bruise sometimes. But anyway, that's what we're talking about when we say yellowish tinge. Hepatitis. Itis means inflammation. This is inflammation of the liver. There are different kinds. Hepatitis A would be, oh, I ate contaminated food, drank contaminated water. Hepatitis B would be, I got this from having unprotected sex. Dangerous sex, I shared needles. Basically, hepatitis B, this is a good way to put it. More contagious than the AIDS virus, spread the same way. There are vaccines for A and B. Hepatitis C comes from blood transfusions. You can get chronic inflammation of the liver, liver cancer. You could die. Cirrhosis is when the liver fills up with fat and then with scar tissue instead of those nice filtering hepatocytes that do their job. Where they say often see in alcoholics due to malnutrition and the excess of alcohol, which is a toxin the liver is forced to break down. Yeah, that's 100% legit. Alcohol is a toxin, and the only reason it doesn't do worse things to you is because it gets broken down before it can do too much damage. What I'm talking about here is ethanol. What is even scarier is methanol, wood, which some people call wood alcohol. It's absinthe has some methanol in it, but yeah, methanol's super bad, much worse for you. Basically, what I'm saying is a higher toxicity, more difficult to break down. The liver can regenerate, grow new cells, if you don't damage it too much. Basically what we're saying is it'll try to regenerate, but you have to be doing damage at a slower rate than it can grow back. If you don't, you'll get liver failure and probably need a liver transplant. All right, so let's talk about regulation of digestive secretions. Secretion of digestive juices is controlled by the nervous system and digestive hormones. Basically, you got two methods of sending signals through the body. One is on off, fast. How fast? As fast as electricity, because it is electrochemical. I'm talking about the nervous system. And those signals there, bam, bam, on off. The other one is the endocrine system, hormones. And those, you release chemicals and they float around in the body and they stay there for a while. So those signals take longer to send and they have much more lasting effects. They can last hours, they might last days, depends on the particular hormone. But in this case, we're talking about digestive control. So understand the relationship. Know that both of these nervous system and digestive hormones are to control what happens. If you look at food, smell food, the parasympathetic, that is the part of the nervous system that normally, it's the opposite of like adrenaline. Adrenaline stimulates sympathetic nervous system, and you're more likely to be able to run from the horrible bear, the scary predator. Parasympathetic chills, cools things down. This makes sense because parasympathetic is going to stimulate digestion. If you are running from a bear, you don't waste time and energy on digestion. You divert all that blood to the muscles in the brain so you can get away. Anyway, so in this case, when you see food and you smell it and you really like it, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to say, oh, make stomach acid, make stomach juices. And if the thing you're eating has a lot of protein, then the stomach is going to release gastrin. All right. Gastrin will make all the other things, all the other gastric glands release more. So here we have a drawing and regulation. Let's see. Yeah, they should have an eyeball in this. Anyway, what we're seeing in this picture, the capillary represents your blood, or the artery there represents your blood. So say your stomach fills with food, and as the stomach is expanding, you have the stomach release hormones into the blood. Okay. And those hormones that go into the blood, they will tell other things what's happening, like tell the pancreas, all right, ramp up your production. I've got food and you're going to be dealing with it soon in the intestine. Sorry, or I've got food and the intestines are going to be dealing with it soon. You better get ready to defend them. So that type of thing. All right, so Nervous system and hormonal control. Secretin is released by the duodenum. Remember, there are three parts of the small intestine: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So, first part of the small intestine, just past the pylorus on the stomach, we have secretin, and it is released by hydrochloric acid in the chyme. Remember, chyme is the mixture of the acid and the food as your stomach kneads it up. Cholecystokinin, CCK, also released by the duodenum, but only whenever there's protein and fat. That makes the liver make more bile, and that bile is going to be stored in the gallbladder. It'll make the gallbladder contract and release bile. And both of these are also going to increase production of pancreatic juice, which makes sense. Like I said, you have the stomach full of food trying to warn the intestines bad things are coming, the acidity, and warn the pancreas that it needs to defend the duodenum. All right, there's the progress check here. I'm going to pause for a moment. You can stop the video, see if you answer the questions. If you can't, roll it back to the beginning and rewatch, then answer the questions. All right, we're moving on. The large intestine and defecation. I'm going to tell you right now, where it says structure and function of the large intestine. The large intestine, a little bit of B vitamin production, or sorry, I'll cover myself here. A little bit of vitamin production. I think it's B vitamin, and a lot of water absorption. That's about it. It doesn't really absorb that many nutrients. Anyway, list the disorders of the large intestine, provide a cause for each. We've already talked about diverticulitis, but let's move on. All right, so the large intestine includes the cecum. We call that the appendix, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. All true, but I also want to show you the colon. You have the ascending colon that comes up the right side, the transverse colon that goes across the body from right to left, the descending colon, which goes down the left side, and then the sigmoid colon, which is kind of S-shaped and carries the colon back to the middle of the body. And then the rectum is that little straight piece that goes down to the anal canal. Anyway, the large intestine is large because it is large diameter. Doesn't mean it's long. The small intestine is much longer. So remember, when you hear large intestine, small intestine, that's a reference to the diameter, how big around they are. So small intestine, large intestine. All right. The cecum is the first part. Like I said, in us, it's we talk about the appendix, and it does have a function. A lot of people are like, oh, the appendix has no function. It does have a function. You have a lot of white blood cells that live there because it's surrounded by lymphatic tissue. The wall has a lot of lymphatic tissue. Basically, it's good at fighting infections. Think of it as a forward staging post for the immune system. Now, if you lose that particular camp, in other words, if a doctor takes your appendix out, it's not the end of the world. So if we have an inflamed, remember inflammation is itis, an inflamed appendix, we call it appendicitis. I want to point out one other thing before I continue. Vermiform appendix. Vermiform is a German word, which is in the form of the worm. Yeah, it literally means worm-shaped or form of the worm. Appendix, because in us, this cecum is this little tiny thing In a horse or a rabbit, well, yeah, in a horse or a rabbit is this huge thing, bigger than the intestine by far. I mean, huge diameter, bigger than the stomach. I mean, it's, I know that's for a rabbit. I think that's for a horse. But anyway, the point is the cecum is huge in them because they do what's called hindgut fermentation. Okay. Hindgut fermentation means, we didn't do a good job breaking the food down in the stomach and intestines. We'll break it down now. And so before the large intestine, before most of the large intestine, they will pack food into there with bacteria to break it down further. Now, I don't want to get off. This is human biology, but there's some weird stuff that's going on there when you do. When you're a hindgut fermenter, you either have to have a super ultra long large intestine to try and get nutrients out. Because remember, what we're about to say is the large intestine doesn't do much absorption of nutrients. So if you're a hindgut fermenter, you try to take this organ that is not real good at it and use it for nutrient absorption. And in the horse, that's what they do. It's longer, much, much longer, so more surface area to try and absorb with. Rabbits have a much more creative method of doing this that I may throw a link in for you. It's terrifying. Okay, it's not terrifying. It's weird. The short answer is they pass everything through their intestine twice. Once to do the initial breakdown and once to absorb the nutrients. But look, we're talking humans. It is human biology. So let's move on. Okay. I just went out and found a link that shows you the size of the cecum and the weirdness of rabbits. Let's move on. So here we have a human intestine, a human large intestine. And a couple things I want to show you. First is this little tiny vermiform appendix, which, like I said, that's that is that plus this first haustra, this first pouch, forms the cecum. In other animals, like a rabbit, this is bigger than the stomach. It's huge because they do hindgut fermentation. But don't worry about that. Here they have small intestine coming in. I want you to know that this right here, the circle, that's where the food passes from the small intestine into the large. We call this the ileocecal valve, okay, because it's between the ileum. Remember, the small intestine is your duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. So this part of the small intestine is the ileum. So ileocecal valve, because it's between the ileum and the cecum. All right. We have ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. Those are, sigmoid is supposed to be S-shaped, and I guess you could see a backwards S there, kind of. Anyway, but yeah, sigmoid because they think it's S-shaped. Rectum, rectus means straight, so it's straight shot out. Other things I want to point out here, and they'll be on future slides, I'm sure. Each one of these little pouches is called a haustra. This thin little line of muscle, that's the tennae coli, the tendon-like muscle of the colon. That's all the muscle that's left of that muscular layer. Everything else is absent in the large intestine. So there's no circular muscle at all. Anyway, let's jump into it, move on. So the large intestine, we have an ascending colon, a transverse colon, a descending colon, a sigmoid colon. The rectum, you've seen that. Okay, the rectum opens at the anus where There's the defecation, the process of getting rid of feces, or let's be blunt, pooping. All right, moving on. So what is the purpose of the large intestine? It doesn't make any enzymes. It doesn't absorb most nutrients. There are a few vitamins, but most nutrients it doesn't. What it does is absorb water from feces to prevent dehydration. This is a fancy way of saying that it makes the poop more compact because it takes the water out, keeps the water inside the body because water is precious. You need that stuff. We've all seen what happens when this doesn't work. When your body gets something in the digestive system and the body's like, I don't know what it is, I don't like it, get it out, get it out, get it out. And you have diarrhea. That's passing the food through the large intestine as quickly as possible so it doesn't have time to absorb. The vitamins that we've talked about, that does a little bit of digestion of vitamins, those vitamins are actually made by bacteria living in the large intestine. They break down stuff that we can't break down, and they produce B vitamins and K vitamins. All right. So feces are 3/4 water, 1/4 waste on average. Obviously, that varies. There's a scale that they have that they follow to describe the consistency. Hold on. Okay, sorry. I went to find the Bristol Stool Scale. They have a copy at WebMD, or discussion about it at WebMD. I just want you to know that the 3/4 water, 1/4 solid waste, that's a most of the time thing. There are always exceptions. Obviously, everybody knows there are different types of feces. Anyway, bacteria and dietary fiber that we can't digest, are the stuff that remains. The bacteria are what cause the odor. They're what cause the gas. Stercobilin, which is the breakdown of bilirubin, which you remember was urobilinogen. And the oxidized iron is what's causing the brown color of the feces. So again, the brown color is iron from the hemoglobin that's been passed from heme to urobilinogen to bilirubin to stercobilin. It's a long process, but that's why poop is brown. Moving on. Okay, so defecation is getting rid of it. Remember when we swallowed, we had peristalsis, where your muscles moved, the ring-like muscles on the GI tract move stuff through. Well, the same thing is happening with the rectal muscles. You have a contraction that is ring-like, contraction that is ring-like, and the part above contracts, which pushes things down, pushes down, pushes down. It's basically coordinated movement. So peristalsis will force the feces into the rectum. Stretching the rectal wall initiates nerve impulses. Rectal muscles contract. You can just right here. Anal sphincters relax, and it leaves the body. I want you to know we have an external and an internal anal sphincter. We actually have two muscles there. And the external one is skeletal. It's under conscious control. All right. Diarrhea is when we move things through faster, have more peristalsis, spend less time in the large intestines, so we don't absorb water out. This could be because you have an infection or some type of nervous stimulation thing. Constipation, your feces are too hard, too dry, probably spending too much time in the intestine. But we can use water and fiber, which stores water, to make the feces a consistency that's easier to pass. Now, hemorrhoids are varicose veins of the anus, basically. You have large inflamed blood vessels of the anus, and can be due to chronic constipation, pregnancy, aging, anal sex. All of those things can cause hemorrhoids. Diverticulitis. We already talked about forming diverticula, the little pouches. If you have those, it would be a spot where feces could catch or get caught in those little pouches. That's when because we don't have the solid muscle layer, the round layer of muscle on the large intestine, you could have the mucosa pooch out between all you have for the large intestine for muscle are those little bands of long longitudinal muscle, the teni coli. And so you have a band here, nothing in between. You could have between those two bands, a little piece of mucosa sticks out. That forms a pouch inside the intestine. That's a diverticula. And if that pouch gets stuff in it and gets inflamed, that's diverticulitis.